Hey, I'm Rob Andrejewski, the Director of Sustainability at the University of Richmond, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Gambles Mill Eco Corridor, a great new feature on campus. Before I get into that, though, I just want to touch on the University of Richmond Office for Sustainability's definition of sustainability. So ultimately, it's about creating conditions, environmental, social, and economic, that foster the health and well-being of people and the natural world now and into the future. What it comes down to is meeting people's needs in a just and equitable way, and doing so without compromising the natural world. It's a big, audacious goal, but it's something we have to do. And ultimately, what we work on is through goals and policy change and education, is understanding our impact and making sure we're not having any negative outcomes. And if we are, addressing those, and ideally becoming an example of what's possible for others, so that when they visit the University of Richmond or learn about what we're doing, they can think about ways to increase sustainability in their own lives or businesses. The Gambles Mill Eco Corridor is an excellent example of sustainability on campus. And that's because it was all about a project that included lots of people, lots of history, with a focus on education, to create a new area on campus that really demonstrates best practices for taking care of our resources. So the image that you see right now, the colorful area, is the Eco Corridor. And the up top is the Country Club of Virginia. Below is the IM fields. This is the physical plant. Any students on campus will recognize Tyler Haynes Commons here. And essentially what we've got is a spillway from West Hampton Lake into Little Westham Creek, that then flows through the Eco Corridor. This is Little Westham Creek here, then goes to Kanawha Canal and eventually the James River. And so restoring that area was essential. If you were on campus just a few years ago, you'd see a very different stream than you see today. In addition to that, there's a lot of invasive species management that went on in this area, as well as a focus on connecting people to the land. And any stream restoration has to focus on stormwater management to be effective. So really, we're just going to start with the stream restoration here. This is a little bit of a blow up, and like I said, so this is the stream down here in blue, Country Club of Virginia up here. This white used to be a road, Gambles Mill Road, that became Gambles Mill Trail after it was close to car traffic decades ago. It's been used for quite a while, but it was in disrepair until the recent restoration. So any stream, in order for it to be healthy, has to interact with the banks around it and so the floodplain, so that when we have a stream surge due to rain, the banks of the stream should not be so high that the water cannot crest over it. Now, most of the time we think about flooding, we don't, in our homes or in our roadways, we don't really want flooding to be happening, but a stream is a different circumstance. What we want is for the water to overflow the banks so that it can percolate through the land, and thereby trapping in the phosphorus and nitrogen, bacteria, and sediment in that area. And the water can then flow down cleaner when after the rain, after it slows itself down by overflowing the bank, into the next largest body of water in the watershed. As you can see from this image, there's quite a bit of erosion that was occurring in Little Westham Creek. It'd be very difficult on the side where the person with the orange vest standing, for the water to crest over that area. And he's really in a very steep section. I think that leads up toward the IM fields. The stream actually had to be moved over during restoration in order to make it possible for the stream to overflow its banks. You can also see here that the stream was very wide. And so again, we want a wide floodplain, but we want the channel that the stream is actually in to be much narrower, and so that the normal flow, when it's not raining, is narrow and it's shallow. In this case, you got pretty wide. You can see here it looks to be, to me, at least 20 to 25 feet wide in this section, and rather deep. And so when we have wide and deep water, when we get a big rain event, and it's been raining quite a bit recently in Richmond, we get water chugging toward the James River with everything that came upstream in it without an opportunity for the land to act as a filter. And so we wanted to change that with Little Weston Creek in order to be better stewards to the James River and the Chesapeake Bay. And so this is what it looked like beforehand. You can see the trail here, and this is the stream. Now, it's a little bit sinuous. It's not completely straight, but it's relatively straight. And so I'm going to show you some time-lapse video that shows taking this, which was wide in some areas and deep in some areas, it's called channelized, and made it into a more sinuous, shallower, more easily, more likely to overflow its banks when it rained. And so this process was actually much more intensive. When I had first learned about that we were doing a stream restoration, I didn't really think about all of the heavy equipment and construction that would be required. Like I said earlier, we actually moved the stream away from the eastern bank, which is fascinating to me. So I'm sorry, the western bank, which was over here, the physical plant is just to the right in this photo. We also graded the land to create that floodplain and removed all of the vegetation in that area. In order to take the stream out of the equation so that they could grade the land, bring in the heavy equipment, we actually had to pump the water from one section, take these giant hoses and bring it down further. And they did that in a series. So they'd come in, they'd allow the water to flow through this machine. It's basically like a pump on wheels that would then bring the water further down. Now, I want you to remember these rocks right here in this picture. But while you're looking at this, we had a lot of heavy equipment. We had backhoes, bulldozers, even at some parts it looked like equipment like that you would see in a mine. It was really quite an impressive project. And the group that ran that was a company called Res, who were our partners on this project. So you can see here the water being sucked in. And then if you follow this tube all the way up here, it's spilling out further down, which allows these folks to clear this stuff out and grade this area with their heavy equipment. The next step in the process, after they graded it and changed the channel, they actually moved the channel of the stream over quite a few feet to the right in this photo. You can see those S-turns, and you can also see just how narrow the stream is. So the reason for that, like I said earlier, is that so when we do have a rain event, it floods into this area. So that we want this floodplain to function. And there are actually 3 grades. There's the initial floodplain, and then there's one a little bit higher, and there's actually a third one that's just a little bit higher. You'll also notice that there's these little blocks in here. There is a fiber netting called coir. It's made from coconut husks that is put over the top of the earth, and then those wooden stakes are put in, and that is to decrease erosion. Stream bank stabilization is essential to any stream restoration project. It's the crux of it, because what we want to make sure of is that the land does not erode further, bringing even more sediment than was coming up from upstream downstream, and in our case into the James River. So we've got this fiber netting on top that seeds are then planted, because ultimately that netting is going to biodegrade, which is really great. And there are thousands of grass seedlings and other water tolerant plants planted there. And so you can actually see them coming up in this next photo. And eventually those wooden stakes will also biodegrade, and you'll just have plants. Now we are going to be planting, in addition to all the grasses and flowers that are there, we're going to be planting 9,000 trees and shrubs in this relatively small area. So we're not going to have these beautiful views of the stream like this in the future. It's going to change over time. It's going to be very much a living project. So I talked about remembering these rocks. These actually came from previous digs. I believe these were from the Gateway Apartments, that when they dug out the foundation for those buildings, they removed these rocks, and our facilities folks knew they wanted them for a project someday. So what they did is they created Little Weston Beach. So remember, this is Little Weston Creek here. And these rocks, you know, thinking about Texas Beach or Hollywood rocks in the river, there's just a place for students and other folks to hang out, be by the stream. And we look forward to people being able to use this. And you can see how it changes during the seasons. And this is a much more recent. So it's not just the seasonal change, it's also the growth of the vegetation that has been planted that's coming in. So it's been about a year that these rocks have been here. So it's really excited to actually see folks interacting with this site at this location. Now, stormwater management, which I mentioned, is really critical. The reason that we want to make sure we have a healthy stream and a healthy floodplain is because the Chesapeake Bay and the James River have too much phosphorus, too much nitrogen, too much bacteria, and there's too much sediment. And so by improving our stream, although it's only half a mile, we have the ability to support the goals of the whole Chesapeake Bay watershed and Virginia's goals for the James River. To really just support the decreasing. This project is going to, or is already reducing the amount of total phosphorus. And so it's going to be 1,440 pounds of phosphorus not going into the James River just by doing our stream restoration. And so the stormwater management is really critical here. So this was early in the project. You should recognize the way this looks now. And this came from the folks at RES this was the first opportunity after we had done the initial restoration for them to see what it looked like when we had a rainfall. So you can see the stream starting to fill up, and soon in the early afternoon, the floodplain starts becoming flooded, doing its job. This is exactly what is supposed to happen when it rains. And so by expanding, it slows the flow of the water into the Kanawha Canal and allows the land, which wants phosphorus and nitrogen to help those plants grow. And then you can see it actually shrink back, which is really neat. And we've got lots of other evidence. We had a huge rainfall recently. It's incredible to see the stream in action as the water sits in the floodplain, collects, and then just the next day, it's back to being a sinuous stream. Another feature are something called step pools. There are multiple tributaries coming from down the watershed, and they come from the neighborhoods, and then because of the location, they come through the Country Club of Virginia. And so these two tributaries that are starred here actually have something called a step pool. And this is a picture of what step pool looks like. The banks are stabilized on either side, so when the water's coming through with the tributary, what we don't want is for it to carve its own channel. So, and the water steps down to slow it down, and then when this water, which comes from upstream, goes into the river, rather than it coming from the spillway off of the back of the dam, this is coming from the east, and it's going to then do the exact same thing in a rainstorm, where the flow of water will then overflow the stream channel, and the phosphorus and nitrogen and sediment will be taken care of in the mainstream channel. And what's really critical is that we want people to understand. So working with student groups, we were able to create signs. This sign was, all of the content was created by students in a capstone geography and environmental studies class. And we look forward to continuing to work with folks, but we want people to come visit to know what they're looking at and to understand the value of the restoration and the value of the step pool. Another feature just near one of our outdoor classrooms is the rain garden. It's one of my favorite features on campus, and it is a place that the water is meant to collect in from tributaries that are closer to River Road. So there are two little tributaries that are shunted off into this rain garden, and then there's a culvert underneath the trail. And so when the water hits a certain level inside the rain garden, only then does it get discharged to the creek. So again, it's a mechanism to slow down the conveyance of water, which is really critical. We want the water away from our roads, away from our homes, which is wonderful, but we don't want it going into our storm drains necessarily really quickly, and we don't want it going into our streams and into our river really quickly, because it's going to carry everything with it and not have a chance to get rid of the filter out phosphorus, nitrogen, sediment, bacteria. These rain gardens do exactly that. So they're doing the same thing the stream is doing further downstream, which is great. And so you can interact with it and see it. And the plants absolutely love all the nutrients that are going into that rain garden. And then when the water hits a certain level, which takes some time, it then gets discharged further down and it goes into Little Westham Creek. Invasive species management is our next thing that we're going to talk about here. And this was a huge part of our project. Back in the day, if you walked the Gambles Mill Trail, this is what you saw as you walked by. So we were really targeting 4 main species, though there were many more. There's Chinese privet, Japanese stiltgrass, English ivy. We had honeysuckle in there. We had multiflora rose, poison ivy, which isn't an invasive species, but it's not something that we like walking through necessarily. So we have a lot of classes that have used this place for years. It's been a teaching site and it's been critical to education, especially of our geography and environmental studies, biology students for a long time. And we want to welcome as many people as possible, but you kind of had to bushwhack through to get down to the stream. So we brought in the heavy hitters. This is a company called Goatbusters that Rez contracted on our behalf, and it was really amazing to have goats on campus doing what they love to do, which is eat as many green things that they can get their mouths on. Goat browsing, as it's called, is a really wonderful ecological mechanism for reducing brush. And in the case of our invasive species, they were so happy to have at it. It's really neat because their hooves actually help break up the soil, which makes it great for new things to grow. They have natural fertilizing capabilities after they're done eating and the natural processes of life. And they're just wonderful to see in action. And really, so many people, when we first brought the goats here, came out to the eco corridor to see what was going on. So they were great ambassadors as well. And you can see why here. There were also baby goats, which was a huge attraction, a bit of a surprise to us, but a wonderful surprise when we saw these baby goats in action on campus. They're a lot of fun. So one of the things about goats that you have to be careful with is that they eat indiscriminately. It's what you want is for them to eat all of the area that you no longer want those invasive species. But this is a sweet gum tree, and these are things that we'd be planting. So if we're going to be using goats again, we have to choose an area where we are okay with them eating everything, or we have to fence it in such a way that they can't reach it. And you actually have to walk through before the goats get there to make sure things like cherry trees are poisonous to the goats. You have to make sure that there are none of those in that area. But really fun to have the goats there. Would welcome them back anytime. And so after you remove the invasive species, and then the reason that we wanted to get rid of invasive species is because they threaten the habitat for our native fauna. So the animals that live here have evolved in conjunction with the plants that are native to here. And so when we have invasive species, they outcompete those plants. So the food and shelter that is required for it to be a good habitat isn't there. And so we have a huge loss of diversity, which means that certain other species that, well, a species that maybe their place, their shelter is there, but they don't have anything to live or to eat because that bug can't live here, for example. So we wanted to make sure we plant native species. So we worked with a group called Water Street on the design of this, and they were integral in helping us identify these native plants. We also had lots of great conversations with folks on what we wanted to bring in there. Like I said earlier, by the end of 2021, we'll have planted 9,000 trees and shrubs in the eco corridor. In addition to those trees and shrubs, thousands of grasses and flowers, and all native, trying to make it welcome to our birds, our bees, our fox, our deer. The deer feel very welcome already. Our ducks, all sorts of animals that want to come in. We want to make sure that we are providing a welcome habitat to them. Integral to this project also is the idea of connectivity. We want to connect people to people and people to place. And being an educational institution, our highest priority is education. So there are, now you'll see this on the bottom left, it says Floodplain Terrace Observation Area. That was before we renamed Little Weston Beach. So that's those rocks. We have a pollinator meadow. There's some other really neat areas. I'd mentioned the rain garden, but really seeing the flowers come to life in there, and even the grasses, which aren't as showy but are just as critical, especially for overwintering of our insects, really important. And so in our pollinator meadow, when we have two main pollinator meadows, we have a sign that just explains to people why pollinators are important. And again, trying to get at the idea of possibility. We really want people who are coming here to understand the rationale for why we did what we did, why we have a pollinator meadow. And then there's this whole feature about how they can help pollinators at home. And so that's really important. And so as we're thinking about signage in the future, we want to make sure we explain to folks what is important about why we did something, but it's really critical that also how does it connect to them, and so that they can understand what they can do in their own lives. And this is a common buckeye. Seen lots of these this spring on the trail. We also are very fortunate to have faculty and their families coming and planting milkweed in the eco corridor. So we've got native milkweed going in, and of course, milkweed is critical for monarch butterflies. So that's something we're going to keep a close watch on. In addition to the rain garden and the pollinators, we have two outdoor classrooms, really only one that is accessible right now during the wetter season. But there's two outdoor classrooms that are essentially logs in a square. They are primitive, but they are effective. And so we're really excited to have students out in the outdoor classroom. And the classroom that's featured here is down toward River Road, right near the rain garden. So it's an opportunity to learn about the rain garden. And then in the future, we're hoping to build a wetland observation area because it's just a little bit further down. It'd be great someday to have a boardwalk in there. Now, of course, this site has been used for education for many years, whether it has to do with the stream, looking at water quality, looking at macroinvertebrate assessments, looking at flow, looking at size, all sorts of things to do in the stream. But there's also an opportunity to do cultural studies. So there used to be, the original Gambles Mill Road was actually, there was a rail line that runs parallel to it. And that's where we got our coal. We burn coal to heat campus. We have a huge system of steam tunnels underneath campus for many years, all the way up until 2012. And so that rail line supported that, and then the road supported it after that. And so it's really interesting to think about the history of railways and infrastructure. Likewise, we have a wastewater treatment ruin. I'd love to learn more about this. This is something that we knew about, but was really unearthed during this project, and presents a fabulous opportunity to understand how 100 years ago we attempted to treat water compared to how we do it today. And then even further down there are earthen dam remnants that are even older, that point to the idea of this whole area being flooded on purpose for industry. And so there's lots of opportunities to help us better understand our history, understand who occupied this land before it was part of the university. There's all sorts of connections to our settlement history, to native history, to slave history. So many opportunities for learning in this area. And this is a picture of the wastewater treatment remnant, which yeah, really ripe for study. In addition, another great way of connecting people to the land is gardening. We've had a community garden at the University of Richmond for nearly a decade, or for over a decade now. So this is a picture of the original garden. This is a rendering of what's now known as Abby's Garden. This garden was named after Abby Ayres, who was really the impetus for founding the garden back in 2009. And so this is a much larger, much improved garden for our community with 32 beds and a picnic pavilion, our own shed. We'll be composting in there. We used to have to run water from the steam plant over the stream. Now there's 3 hoses. And it's just really exciting that really excited to get people out there and communing really with, the garden is to me the epicenter of connecting people to people and people to the land. And then also we have a little free library out there. So this is Evan Carpenter, whose mother works here, and reached out and said Evan would love to do a project, and for his Eagle Scout he built us a little free library, which is awesome and very, very well used. And then behind the garden, closer to the stream, is a mulch path, and there's student volunteers who created this. And we talked about throughout the process of designing the stream with the community, people wanted access to the water. And unlike back in the day when you had to sort of bushwhack, we wanted to make it a lot easier. So there are a few different access sites to the water. It's tricky to try to get the trail too close because of that floodplain, and the mulch will wash away. But this provides a pretty good solution. And of course, there is the former road, now the Gambles Mill Trail. After the stream was engineered, the trail was engineered. So we had to build some culverts over the tributaries. We had to address some erosion issues with the old road. And it premiered in the spring of 2020, early spring of 2020, and immediately got use. Lots of bikers and hikers. Never could we have imagined the need for people to be outside in a safe, socially distanced way with a pandemic. But really one of the silver linings for the university is having this area to welcome our staff and faculty, students who are here this summer, as well as our community members, to be able to exercise and get out. The trail got an incredible amount of use in its very first summer, and it promises to have much more as we welcome back our students. So this is a drone shot that was taken this spring that really shows the sinuosity of the waterway, as well as the really pretty trail. This is the Gambles Mill Eco Corridor from up on high. You can even see the intramural fields over here, the ropes course. So if you want to learn more, my name's Rob Andrejewski. You can reach me at sustainability@richmond.edu. Also, Allison Moyer in facilities was the project manager for all of this, and she is an incredible resource. So amoyer@richmond.edu, you can reach her too. So thanks for learning about the Eco Corridor. Don't be a stranger. I hope you get to see it soon. Take care.